Okay, good evening. Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur. Hope you all had a wonderful Yom Tov and are recovering from a wonderful Pesach. Parsha Shemini is a fascinating sedra. We have, of course, Vahi Bayom HaShemini. The Parsha begins with the inauguration of the Mishkan. We've had 7 days of preparation, and now Vahi Bayom HaShemini, which is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we're ready to go. That's how the Parsha begins. The celebration is tempered somewhat because of the death of Nadav and Avihu, and then the Parsha continues with discussions about the korbanos that were brought as part of the inauguration, and it then goes into the laws of kashrus, and at the end of the sedra we deal with halachas of tumah and tahara and ritual purity as discussed in the halacha shir. Now, three beautiful ideas to share with you. The first idea is an idea that I heard from in the name of David Feinstein. Let's go through the source material. So if you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. The Parsha begins, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer, Vahi Bayom HaShemini, etc. And then it says in Vayikra Ches, Pasuk Beis, Kach es Aaron ves bonov itay. Sorry, this is in last week's sedra, I'm so sorry. Parsha Sav, which feels like 100 years ago, which was the Erev Pesach, which fell on Shabbos. That's what we lay in that week. It finishes off in Perek Ches, Kach es Aaron ves bonov itay ves abagod ves shemen hamishcha ves parachatos ves shnei ha'elim u'mepesach oyel moed lo yiseitzu shivas yomim. Don't leave the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan for 7 days. Ad yom melois me'meluachim ki shivas yomim yimali es yetchem. There's a 7-day period of preparation for the Chanukas HaMishkan. Kaches Aaron, Parsha Zu Nemer Shivas Yomim Kaidim Hakomas HaMishkan. This Parsha Sav at the end in Perek Ches, deals with that preparation before the Mishkan. This week's sedra, Parsha Shemini, begins Vahi Bayom HaShemini Kora Moshe Aaron Levon Ziknei Yisrael Vayom El Aaron Kach Lecha Egel Ben Bokar, etc. Says Rashi Vahi Bayom HaShemini Shemini La Miluim. It's the 8th day of the preparation to get the Migdash, the Mishkan going. Hu Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is of course also Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Shehukam HaMishkan Boi Bayom. That is when the Mishkan was set up and inaugurated. And why Kach Lecha Egel Odia Shemachapel HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Dei Egel Zeh Al Ma'aser HaEgel She'oso, etc. It was a kapara for the Egel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was accepting the carbon to teach us that we've had an atonement for the Ma'aser of the Egel. Now, the question that Rabbi David Feinstein asks is an interesting and quite an obvious question, really. True, Vahi Bayom HaShemini, it's the 8th day of the inauguration of the preparation, but it's still the first day of the functioning Mishkan. Yes, you've got 7 days of preparation, but why refer to this day, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the functioning Mishkan, relative to the 7 days that went before it? True, there were 7 days of prep beforehand, but now this is the 8th day. It's the first day of the functioning of the Mishkan. Shiur said, Vahi Bayom HaRishon. It was the first day. It was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's the first day of the Mishkan's operation. Why call it Vahi Bayom HaShemini in reference to the 7 days that preceded it of the preparation? And says Rabbi David Feinstein a very important and very beautiful answer. He says that the Torah is emphasizing that the aspect of preparation. The Torah wants to highlight that preparation for a mitzvah is important. So much so that you've got 7 days to prepare for the functioning Mishkan, for the operation, for the inauguration of the Mishkan, and I will call the first day where we're actually using the Mishkan in reference to those 7 days to highlight, to emphasize that the preparation of a mitzvah is very important. And that's why the Torah calls it Vahi Bayom HaShemini. And we see this elsewhere in many situations, that the importance of preparation for a mitzvah. I mean, just think about it. We're all, Baruch Hashem, exhausted after Pesach. Hopefully a wonderful Yom Tov. The preparation, the hours, the weeks, the months that have gone into to prepare, to Pesach. One of the family stories is when I was a little kid of 2 or 3 or 4 years old, it was Purim. And I came downstairs and I said to my father, Zichron Livrocha, I said to him, Daddy, I don't understand. How can it be Purim downstairs and Pesach upstairs? Because my mother would say, don't take that upstairs, it's Pesach upstairs. So I came very innocently asked, how can it be Purim downstairs and Pesach upstairs? So for weeks, months beforehand, we're preparing, and Pesach is a week at the end of the day, 8 days in a Chutz La'aretz, and think about Seder night, the preparation for Seder night, the Shiurim, the focus, the halachas, Seder night is 4 hours, give or take, 5 hours, whatever it is. By the time you start, this year in England, with second night, we didn't start till who knows what time, 10 o'clock, or 10:30, whatever, yeah. So it goes on till 2, 3 in the morning. We're talking a few hours, but the point is, preparation is important. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu cherishes the preparation almost as much as the mitzvah. In fact, the Chidush Harim says an amazing thing. We know that one of the highlights of Sukkot is the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. Now that's a very strange, when you think about it, Simchas Beis HaShoeva, what is that? You're drawing water to use as the Nisuch HaMayim on the Mizbeach. So the actual ceremony is pouring the water on the Mizbeach. That's what one of the major celebrations of Sukkot. So why do you call the whole sort of surrounding celebration the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the drawing of the water? It should be called Simchas Nisuch HaMayim. That's the main thing. Says the Chidush Harim to highlight the same point, that the preparation is important. You're celebrating the Shoeva, the drawing of the water, which will be used for the mitzvah of Nisuch HaMayim. The Imre Emes, the grandson of the Chidush Harim, the great-grandson of the Chidush Harim, i.e. the Imre Emes was the son of the Sfas Emes, who was the grandson of the Chidush Harim, says a beautiful thing. The mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan, the Torah calls it a mitzvah kala. The Gemara calls it a mitzvah kala. Shaleach teshalach esoim es abonim tikach loch leman yitav levorach yomim. Says Rashi, a mitzvah kala she'ein bo chisoron kis om Torah leman yitav loch. The Torah calls it a mitzvah kala. There's no chisoron kis. You don't have to spend money. You chance upon a bird's nest. There's a shiluach kan. You can shoo away the mother bird, take the eggs. Kal v'choim and matan schor shel mitzvah chamuras, etc. It calls it a mitzvah kala. Why is it called a mitzvah kala? Why is Shiluach HaKan called the mitzvah kala? Says the Imre Emes an amazing answer. Because the Pasuk says, Ki yikar lecha, which the Gemara in Bava Metzia, Kuf Beis Medalef says, Prat lemezuman. You can't prepare it. You've got to have chanced upon it. If you've chanced upon it and there's no preparation, it's a mitzvah kala. Amazing. We've told the story before, but it's worth repeating because I think it's relevant. The fellow who's in Eretz Yisrael, there's always people who have a sort of a track record when it comes to mitzvahs, when it comes to minyan. And I had a friend when I was in high school, he went 5 years without missing a minyan, which is super impressive, particularly in high school. Anyway, but that doesn't compare to a guy in Eretz Yisrael who went 32 years without missing a minyan. Until one time, Pesach Krohn tells this story, you should have a for Shlema, that one time, he had a chasna or something, and he goes to bed very late, it's 1, 2 in the morning, and lies down, his head hits the pillow, and suddenly, I haven't done Ma'ariv. His 32-year record is on the line. So he bolts out of bed, what am I going to do, where am I going to go? He goes to the nearby Stiebel factory in Eretz Yisrael. By that time, it's 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. He looks around, he sees a couple of people learning. He says, have you davened yet? He goes, no, the netz is not for another couple of hours. Yeah, so then he realizes he's in trouble. He finds 2 people eventually on the street who haven't davened yet. He wants to get 7 more people. What does he do? He has a Einfall, he has a light bulb moment, and he basically calls the local taxi company, and he says, send me 7 taxis, and make sure that all drivers are Jewish, no Arab drivers. They come along, and he basically tells them, keep your meters running, I need you inside. Where are we going? Nowhere. And they're here, and he tells them that I haven't missed minyan 32 years, I need a minyan, and he gets his minyan. Fine, and then the Pesach Krohn always adds, the amazing postscript of the story is that not one of them, they were all so impressed, not one of them charged him for it. Okay, beautiful. But what's the point of that story? Who gets more schar? The Ma'ariv that I davened already tonight, or the Ma'ariv that he davened? If he put so much effort in and was willing to pay 7 taxis, to wait 15, 20 minutes, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, the preparation for his Ma'ariv is obviously very precious. The preparation of a mitzvah is really important, and that's what the Torah is emphasizing. Vahi b'yom Shemini. Yes, of course, it's the first day of the operating Mishkan. Why are we calling it day 8? To emphasize that the preparation for a mitzvah is important. Okay, let's press on. The second idea is a fascinating idea. It's essentially a tshuva of the Abiyah Omer, Because, as I mentioned earlier, we have the death of Nodov and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron HaKohen. The Pasuk says in paragraph 2, "Vayikchu b'nei Aaron Nodov Avihu ish machtosoi, vayakrivu lifnei Hashem eish zora shelo tzivah isam." They bring in this strange fire, which they were not commanded to do. V'teitze eish v'lifnei Hashem v'toichal isam v'yamusu lifnei Hashem, and they die. Now, there's a fascinating tshuva of the Abiyah Omer. Let's work it through. Nishalti, this is in Chelek Hey Yerideh Sim L'Chof Aleph. Nishalti be'ish v'isha. I was once consulted and asked by a husband and wife. They had a child, the firstborn child, who was a boy. The father, wanted to call him after his father. And again, of course, in Sephardi practice, you name after the living. So both the father wanted to name after his living father, and the mother wanted to name after his living father. They're both alive. What should they do? Says Rabbi Yosef. There are different practices in different communities regarding baby naming. There are some who are particular not to call after a living person, which is of course Ashkenazi practice. And the others who say no, on the contrary, to name after a living grandparent is wonderful. It's an honor, it's a chashivas to name after a living grandparent. The Commissioner Kosov Ateres Zakenim B'nei Bonim, turning over the page. B'das Zakenim Bali Atosis Parsha V'Yeshev. There's a fascinating Das Zakenim Bali Atosis in Parsha V'Yeshev. Kosvu Mashenema B'Tchila Vayikra Shemoi Yehuda, and the whole Parsha of Yehuda and Tamar. So the pasuk says that Vayikra Shemoi V'achkach Vatikra Shemoi Oinein. So first of all, that the first child is called It says Vayikra Shemoi, he calls him. V'achkach vatikra Shemoi Oinein, and she calls the second child Oinein. Shemaiti mepir Moiri, he's quoting the Das Zakenim in Balei Tosfos. Shekach hoyo min hagam, that was their practice. Hu hoyo koresh shem lebnei rishon, that the husband would call the first child, would have the right, as it were, to name the first child. V'hi koraz achakach shem lebno sheni, and she would have the right to call the second child. V'zeu shekosav achakach v'toisiv oid v'teled ben. And fascinating, the third child, it should revert to the husband. However, it says Vatikra es Shemoi Sheila, but yet she called him. So the first one was called by the father, the second one by the mother, and the third one by the mother. Why? Says the pasuk, "Vahi b'chsiv belidata yisai." Kaloma, that he was in Ksiv, i.e., Yehuda, the father, and Tamar was the mother. Yehuda was b'chsiv when Tamar, his wife, gave birth. Kolomar, shemin adin hoylo Yehuda likra shem lebnei ashlishi. The me'ikar din, it should have reverted to Yehuda. Va'afal pikein hikar l'shem. Why? K'dichsiv atikra, because he was away. He was out of town. Leficha chutz shechloma sheYehuda hoy b'chsiv beledes oisai, that he was out of town in a place called Kaziv. V'lo hoy ba'isa maimed likra l'shem, and he wasn't at the bris to call him his name. Uchsiv shem mokum, etc. So therefore, the practice in in Sephardi circles is based on this, i.e., the father has the first right, then the mother has the second, and with Yehuda, he should have had the right for the third child, but he was out of town, that's why Tamar named him. Now, continues Ravaja, next paragraph. He quotes someone called the Stei Haaretz, Reuven had a child, a firstborn. And Reuven wanted to call him after his father. And his wife wanted to name after her father. And he was a good husband who wanted peace, and he gave in to his wife and said, "Okay, I'll happily name after your father." But he came to me, says the Stei Haaretz, and asked, "Is that the right thing to do? I'm happy to give in and to name after my father-in-law, after my wife's father, but is that a zilzul in kavod aviv? Because in our circles," says the questioner to the Stei Haaretz, I guess Sephardi circles, really I should go first, and I don't want to upset my father, and is it a zilzul in kibudov? Kiven shaminuk shaben arishin nikra Shem Avi Abal veheshiv, and the Stei Haaretz answered, Bikashti b'sifra kodesh. I looked around in holy books. V'lo motzasi remez lezeh. I didn't find an answer to this. Ele shemisvara nira shekiven shekvar nagu olim likra Shem haben arishin kashem Avi Abal. Since in Sephardi circles you name after the father's father, im lo yasakein megaris nosen bekavod aviv. It does take away from the kavod due to the father. You're changing from their practice. Maybe they won't have another child, another son. And therefore no one will be named after the father's father. For Kriyas Hashem hu inyan gadol, and naming after is a big deal. There's no absolute source. There's a zeicher because Yibum, of course, one of the themes of Yibum is to name and to perpetuate the name. Okay, next paragraph. V'gam shamaiti mipi Meiri v'Rebbe mehameh eni chachomim harav hamuflo kamaram mizrachi bal sefer Pri Haaretz she'omer b'shem Chazal ki shnei bnei Aaron nodav avihu. Now you might be thinking, very interesting tshuva. What on earth has this got to do with this week's Sedra? Parsha Shemini. This is a Parsha Shiur. So look at this. He quotes that he heard from this Pri Haaretz that Aaron HaKohen had two sons, the first two, the four sons, but the first two were called Nadav and Avihu. Nikru Hashem Horeihem Shel Aaron HaKohen ve'Elisheva bas Aminadav. We know Aaron married Elisheva, and both Nadav and Avihu were called after the parents, the fathers of Aaron and Elisheva. Why? Because Nadav HaBucher Nikra al Shem Aviha, Aminadav, it's Nachshon bas Aminadav and Elisheva bas Aminadav. They were brother and sister. And Aaron HaKohen's wife was Elisheva bas Aminadav. So Nadav was called after Elisheva's father, Aaron HaKohen's father-in-law. Aminadav he was called Nadav. Va'avihu al Shem Avi Aaron was called after Amram, the father of Aaron, Koloma Avihu, he is like my father. V'nenshu, so what comes out? That Aaron HaKohen and Elisheva, they changed from this practice. That the first one was called after Elisheva's father, Aminadav, and the second child, Avihu, was called after Aaron's father. Says the Pri Haaretz, V'nenshu u'meisu shneim b'chai hareihem, and Nadav and Avihu died in their parents' lifetime. Alidei kama sibos, for many reasons. And in last year's Parsha Shiur, I think we gave from the Michtav Milyo 13 reasons the Chazal give. V'kumesh shekos of Baron hisan of Hashem ma'od lashmidai dahainu kilubonim. Okay. V'gam mipnei hasibah, and another reason could be, which I don't think the Michtav Milyo quoted this reason, mipnei hasibah sheshina seder shemoisam. They called in the wrong order. The first one should have been Avihu, and the second one should have been Nadav. And therefore the first one should be named after the father of the father. Again, this is in Sephardi circles. And Klal, and just finished the tshuva, what I've got on the sheet is just a short extract of the tshuva, but the bottom line is Klal the first child should be named after the father's father, unless his moichel is covered, which earlier in the tshuva, Rabbi quotes, that's indeed what happened with the Ramban. The Ramban was a mechutim with the Rabbeinu Yonah, and the Rabbeinu Yonah died whilst his daughter was pregnant. The daughter married the son of the Ramban, and they named the Ramban. Really, the cover should have gone to the father's father. That means the Ramban. But he said, no, name I'm moichel my cover, the name after the Rabbeinu Yonah, and he'll become a great person. Indeed, they had their grandchild, it was called Yonah, and indeed became a great person. So it's a fascinating psak halacha tshuva of Rabbi, which relates to this sedra. And indeed, the Sephardim, the father has the first right, and Ashkenazim, the practice is the mother does. So as Rabbi says, there are different minhagim in different circles. But of course, the normal caveat applies. In all situations, a lot of common sense is needed, and shalom bayis issues must be considered, and you ask Das Torah if there's any discussion or question mark. Okay, let's finish off with one final idea. And that is something which is a very interesting interaction and conversation that takes place in the Parsha. Like I mentioned, the Parsha begins by Shemini, and you have the death of Nadav and Avihu, and then you have various korbanos that are brought. Now Aaron HaKohen and his two remaining sons are oinanim. They're in mourning. And there's a discussion with Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron as to what korbanos should be brought, and more accurately, whether the carbon should be eaten or burnt. And there's a big discussion, and Moshe Rabbeinu is critical of Aaron HaKohen for not following what he thinks is the correct procedure. And Aaron HaKohen then responds to Moshe and explains why he did what he did. And again, it's a Gemara and it's an involved discussion. Rashi explains it all. But the bottom line is that Vayidah be'Aaron and Moshe, if you look at the penultimate box on the page, Hayitav be'enei Hashem, am I right? I think what I did was right. Vayishma moida vayitav be'enov. And you said, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Aaron, you're quite right. Absolutely correct. Says Rashi famously, Vayitav be'enov, Hoida, Moshe Rabbeinu admitted that he was wrong and Aaron was correct. And he wasn't embarrassed to say, I got it wrong. You were right and I was wrong. The three hardest words in marriage, I was wrong. Now, the Pele Yoetz, in that beautiful sefer, in Ois Tes, he goes through various topics as that is the way of his beautiful sefer. And under Ois Tes, one of the words he discusses is the word tos, a mistake. Now listen to what he says. Tos, ein adam ba'olam shelo yiteh. There is no human being in the world who doesn't make a mistake. We all make mistakes. Like David HaMelech says, Kol ha'odam kozev. We said in Halal just now, Kol ha'odam kozev means that all people, they say false things sometimes. It's not an embarrassment for a person to say, hey, I got it wrong. But for a person to ignore his mistake or overlook it or pretend he didn't make a mistake. For a person to be too embarrassed to admit to his mistake or to deny his mistake, that's a bushel chlima. That's an embarrassment. That's terrible. Says the Pele Yoetz. If he doesn't recognize that he made a mistake, then he's just a fool. But if he's embarrassed, he recognized that he did make a mistake, and he's just embarrassed to admit it, and he wants to perpetuate his mistake, he's making it worse. It's even worse. Because he knows the truth. Why doesn't he just admit it? And have we got anyone greater than Moshe Rabbeinu? So the Pele Yoetz quotes our Pasuk and the Rashi that Moshe Rabbeinu was man enough to stand up and say, Vayitav be'enov, Hoida, he admitted he got it wrong, v'loi boish. V'chein what sinu eson in most eretz, shayu darshim berabim. There are many instances, says the Pele Yoetz, of great people who would darshan in the public, and then they would stand up and say, I got it wrong. Even if it's a bit embarrassing to stand up and say, guys, I made a mistake, or whatever it is, better to be embarrassed in this world than the world to come. Very important yesod, not to just be too embarrassed to admit you made a mistake, but to say I made a mistake. And there are many instances of this. Chaim Soloveitchik is well known, was once giving a shiur in his home, and an out of town person came in and questioned something that Chaim Soloveitchik, the great, one of the greatest Torah giants of the last 150 years. All of the yeshivish learning nowadays is based on his mahalach, on the Brisker Torah. And the guy asked him a question, and Reb Chaim Brisk thought about it, and he closed his Gemara and he said, you're right. And no doubt he was brilliant enough to sort of, fudge some sort of answer, but he didn't. And the same goes with the famous Ma'aseh of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that he had a sort of a trial shiur when he was being thought of to be the Rosh Yeshiva of Kol Torah, and the Hanhola were there, and the founder of Kol Torah was Rabbi Yonah Meretzbach. He was listening to the shiur. He asked a question, and Shlomo Zalman thought about it and said, I don't know. And he went home, and his wife said, how'd it go? And he said, pretty bad. I was asked a question, I didn't know the answer. And later he got the job, and many years later, they told Shlomo Zalman, Rabbi Yonah Meretzbach told him, he goes, you know why you got the job? Because you were intellectually honest enough to say, I don't know. You admitted it. That's the sign of a man. I want to finish with this, that a year or so ago I read a book, a fabulous another one of Rabbi Stroll Besser's classics. He wrote a book about a gentleman called Mr. Benny Fishoff, who had a fascinating life story. A young man, a sole survivor of a family after the Holocaust, and he took the richness of his youth as a Ger Chassid in Lodz through to Shanghai. He was there during the war years, and eventually he made his way to New York, and he was very successful in business. And as Yisrael Besser describes, Rabbi Fishoff was a very clever man. He was a Kliger Yid. He embodied the cleverness and the perception of the old-time Polish Yidden, and he used his warmth and wisdom to help countless Jews with financially and with advice and with a lot of chokhmah. And Yisrael Besser tells an anecdote in that book that one time a young friend of Mr. Fishoff was upset about a negative business experience he had, and he shared his hurt feelings with Mr. Fishoff, and he said, and I'll quote, this is a bit from the book, he signed a contract, how could he break it? And this fellow was complaining to Mr. Fishoff. Mr. Fishoff nodded empathetically and shared one of his wise aphorisms. Contracts are for honest people, he said, and they are there to remind you of the terms of the agreement, but nothing more. A difficult person can always find a way around a contract, so the only solution is to learn from the mistake and avoid doing business with him again. It was important to Mr. Fishoff that his younger friends understood that some deals are bad, and it's best to move on from the people and methods that led to failure. The filing cabinets in this office, he would often tell his grandchildren, are filled with records of bad deals. We hold on to them because it's important to remember. Making mistakes is human, we all do it, and our Parsha shows that the greatness is to acknowledge that we made a mistake, and having the strength of character to admit to errors and to respond and to learn from them. And that's really what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing. Vayitav be'enei Hashem lo boish hayde v'lo boish. He was man enough to admit, and he wasn't embarrassed to admit a mistake. So there we have it. 3 ideas this evening. Number 1, why is it Vahi Bayom Shemini? It should be Bayom Rishon. It's the first day of the functioning Beis Hamikdash. The teretz is to emphasize, says Rabbi David Feinstein, to emphasize the importance of preparation for a mitzvah, like we prepared for Seder, for Pesach, so much preparation for a relatively short period, because the preparation is important. That's why it's Simchas Beis HaShoeva and not Simchas Nisuch HaMayim, says the Chidush Harim, because the focus is on the preparation. And that's why, says the Imre Emes, that Shiluach HaKan is called a mitzvah kala. And as per the story of the man ordering the 6 taxes or the 7 taxes to daven Marav at 3 a.m. in the Shtibel factory. And then you have the amazing tshuva of the Abi Omer of Vad Yosef with Nodov and Avihu. Why were they punished? So aside from the very many reasons given by Chazal, I refer to the last year's Shiur or the year before on the Michtav Melio, we're going through the common theme between all 13 reasons, but another reason that appears is because they didn't follow the practice of naming in the correct order. And Nodov was named after Elisheva's father, Avi was named after Aaron's father, and that was against what the norm should have been, says Rabbi Yosef, quoting, I think, the pre-8s. And then, true humility is admitting mistakes. We all make mistakes. We shouldn't be too embarrassed to admit it, as per the Peleyo it says, and is seen by Moshe Rabbeinu in this week, etc. And lots of precedents in history in more recent times, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and Benny Fishoff, as just mentioned. Okay, thank you.